I thank you for coming back to the Tony Montana channel. This channel is the place where the dogs and good men behind them are the stars. We aim to keep the history of the breed alive for future generations. A reminder that all the content in the channel is meant for informational, educational, and historical purposes. We do not condone illegal activities of any kind. We aim to provide free access to factual information about the breed, the dogs of yesteryear, and the people behind the historical dogs. This channel does not aim to sell anything to anyone. We work hard to provide fresh information not found anywhere else. Remember to subscribe, comment, and like the audio video. The only reward we for our time putting this together are your likes to the video. The name of this article is Bloodlines, written by Hihath in his book, Pit Dog Savior. Please support the writer by buying his book online. Now, let us start with the article. Rick was dead set on getting some of the Bolio bloodline. He especially liked the bully boy Bob line. Bob was supposedly out of Bolio. In the dog breeding game you have to be skeptical in believing how dogs are really bred. Unless you bred the dog yourself, you really never know what a pup's out of. This is especially true when dealing with puppy peddlers, especially those that operate in large volume as Pat Patrick did. Pat had sold as many good dogs as anyone, but he had also sold as much junk as anyone. Most of the large breeders were switching papers and breeding curs just to get pups to sell. The schoolteacher and BA Trick didn't get along. Pat was real arrogant and had a big demand for pups. He did not like being quizzed by the skeptical schoolteacher. Rick had told Mike Shebesta from Colorado that he wanted a good Bolio bred bitch, but he couldn't deal with Pat. Mike offered to get a pup from Pat for Rick and act like it was for himself. Mike had Champion Sooner, Champion Buster, and Champion Shorty. He was a feared dog. Man. Mike had beaten the legendary Marcel dog out of Oklahoma with Champion Buster. Anybody that was anybody knew Mike. Patrick knew if he could sell a good dog to a good dog man and that dog man made a name for the dog, he would sell hundreds more pups on the dog's reputation. This strategy worked for him and many other breeders for decades. The game was steamrolling in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Breeders were making fortunes. Mike went to Arizona to pick up the teacher's pup. He told Rick that Patrick had a big pen with about 30 little red pups in it and you couldn't tell them apart. Mike said Patrick looked at the gang of pups and said, "There's one of them Bolio pups," and snatched up a little red female. Mike brought her to Nebraska and Rick named her Lil Red. On paper, she was registered as Hihath's La Joya. She was 5/8 Bolio with about 1/4 red baby. Rick was so proud of that little pup. You'd have thought she was pure gold. Lil Red didn't turn out to be a great dog herself, but produced a dog named Smiling Sam that was as one good a dog as Rick had ever owned or seen. Rick soon acquired a tight-bred Tonka dog named Joker from Dwight Biggs in Oklahoma. Dwight was a close friend of the great Ronnie Banderson from Winewood, Oklahoma. Ronnie had been dominating the Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas areas for years. In the 80s, you would see his wins, more than anyone's, in the Sporting Dog Journal. The Sporting Dog Journal was published by Jack Kelly out of Georgia. Jack did his best to report matches, record champions, and grand champions. He provided a way for dog men to advertise and communicate. Jack was a stand-up man who was pestered by do-gooders. He took care of the journal for many years. At the turn of the century, a man from New York took over the journal and he was soon shut down by the government. The loss of the journal was a terrible loss for dog men and the great game American Pit Bull Terrier breed. It was a big step in the government shut down of the preservation of the real pit bull. Joker was young and shy when Rick got him, but Rick worked with him and soon got him started. He rolled him a few times and matched him into the Heartbreakers. Joker was a Tonka Red Baron cross and fought their style. He got more intense and scratched harder the longer it went. Joker outclassed the high-dollar Carver-bred dog from Texas, much to the dismay of the rich, but ignorant, heartbreakers. This included their new member, Rick's former partner, Kevin Cull. Big Nick, one of the Heartbreaker gang, was about 6 feet 5 inches, 250 pounds. Big Nick threw the money on the floor when the match was over. Funny how so many big, tough, wannabe dog men act like spoiled little crybabies when things don't go their way. The schoolteacher went on to become very successful and made quite a name for himself with the Tonka Bolio Bloodlines and a few others he picked up along the way. His best Patrick-bred dog was probably Smiling Sam out of the tight Tonka male and the tight Bolio bitch. He was a 33-pound, red nose, tall, slim build, and ear dog deluxe. For his size, Smilin' Sam was dominate on Rick's yard. Rick had made a new friend in Oklahoma named Dwight Biggs. Biggs went by the name of Snow White. Biggs had helped Rick get a pretty good dog named Ben from Ronnie Banderson. Ben had beaten Octavio in Texas in 1:45. Rick later beat Nibble from New Mexico in over 2 hours with Ben. Nibble had a dog from the reputed Bert Sarl out of Florida. Sarl was a large peddler like Patrick and had sold a bunch of good ones and many curs. Dibble's dog was a dandy out of Blue Monday, Oklahoma. Shorty refereed and it was a barn burner near Sayre, Oklahoma. Ben was a Tonka Red Baron Cross, Ronnie Banderson's best breeding. Old Ben was a heck of a dog, but not the same caliber as Smilin' Sam. Many Tonka-bred dogs would raise their lips to look like they were smiling at you. Rick dearly loved his Tonka dogs. They were a solid line that could take a beating and dish one out. They were long-winded naturally and the schoolteacher was rapidly becoming one of the best conditioners in the country. His love of the sport was second to none. In order to watch matches and learn more, he spent every spare dime he had on dogs, feed, phone conversations, and travel. He frequently visited Dwight Biggs in Oklahoma. The schoolteacher became a close friend of Biggs, so he thought. Biggs had solely Tonka and Marcel dogs, with the exception of one Copland-bred dog from the Northwest. Dwight was high as a kite on his little Copland-bred dog and he just happened to be the same size as Smilin' Sam. Dwight had listened to Rick brag about Smilin' Sam on the phone. He told Rick he had won his size, but didn't think Rick should school out any young dogs on his bad little Copland dog. That was exactly what Rick liked to hear because he had tons of confidence in his dogs. He looked at them pretty hard and even though he hated culling dogs, he had a feeling Sam would shake the you-know-what out of Dwight's dog. They met at Dwight's and Dwight's dog came charging hard into the chest, just like Biggs said he would. Turned out, he was tailor-made for Smilin' Sam. Sam was tall and thin. Big's Copland dog was short and stocky and strong as a bull. But Sam got deep into his ear and pedaled backwards and rolled around coming back to his feet. Dwight's dog wore himself down and that is when Sam really turned it on. He started shaking the ear harder and more often. By 30 minutes Sam had him all messed up, because an intense ear ride, with that kind of shaking, really plays with the equilibrium. Sam finally had him down and about to put him away. Dwight's pride was hurt and so was his little Copland dog. Biggs knew the schoolteacher had an ace. An ace is a dog that has it all: strength, mouth, wrestling ability, and gameness. Dwight said, "Let's match Sam and make some money. I can get Tommy to work him and we will do it here and let everyone think you are traveling down here." Rick agreed and left Smilin' Sam and Ben to be worked by the famous Oklahoma Shorty. He had heard so much about Shorty's success, he had put him on a pedestal. Unfortunately for the schoolteacher, Tommy Cowood turned out to be a drug-dealing scumbag that just happened to be pretty successful in dogs, all because he was fortunate enough to get some really good dogs from Ronnie Henderson and Earl Tudor. The most famous dogs Cowood had were Marcel and Blondie. Blondie was an outstanding producer and Marcel was a black rough son of a gun. He was feared by most dog men in the Texas and Oklahoma circuit. A dog named Buster had the same reputation in the Colorado area. After a lot of hype, they were hooked into each other. Cowood sold Marcel to Pat Simples. Pat had to refinance his house to pay for Marcel and get money for the big match. Simples and the schoolteacher both soon learned to never trust Tommy Cowood. But before you hear about that, you need to hear about one of the biggest matches ever involving Oklahoma's Shorty. It was a well-publicized match between two big bad boys. Buster came from Andre Brauzau of Canada and Marcel was from Oklahoma. Pat Simples and Cowood both lived in a small town called Hobart, home of the great Earl Tudor. Earl was as great a breeder as anyone in history. Simples worked at the grain elevator in this tiny town and Marcel was his prize possession. Simples was a greenhorn in dogs and referred to Shorty about everything, especially while conditioning Marcel. Shorty lived next to Simples and didn't work a real job. He was a hustler. Simples had refinanced his house to come up with the money for the match. There was a lot of money on the line. Simples worked Marcel faithfully and kept asking Shorty how he'd know when Marcel had peaked in his conditioning. Shorty, being a little wise guy, told Simples that Marcel's temperature would drop 2 degrees when he had peaked. So, every day, Simples took Marcel's temperature rectally, morning, noon and night. Kerwood would look out his window every day at noon waiting for Simples to come home from work to take Marcel's temperature. He'd laugh every time he saw Simples put the thermometer up Marcel's butt. After several weeks, Simples went to Shorty one day and said, "Tommy, Marcel's temperature is always the same. Do you think he will ever peak?" Tommy laughed and said, "You idiot, do you really think his temperature is going to drop?" It turned out to be a heck of a fight going back and forth with Buster coming out on top. Both were great dogs, but Buster turned out to be a much better producer, even though he wasn't bred much and Marcel was bred over and over. Mike Shebesta of Colorado kept Buster for many years after that big match. The schoolteacher ended up with a bloodline that included Buster crossed with Kenny Allen's champion Butch, double grand champion Tornad's father. Dwight Biggs fed a lot of Marcel pups and never ended up with a good match dog. Mike Shebesta handled and conditioned Buster and quite frankly, was a lot better dog man than Cowood and company. This is what most likely made the difference in two great dogs. So now maybe you understand how School became close to Dwight Biggs. After all, Biggs had played a huge part in getting him some good dogs. He even lent School a great Tonka-bred dog named Duran. Duran went 3 hours for Skull in a good one against a dog from Florida. And perhaps you can see why Skull was fooled into thinking Oklahoma Shorty was a real dog man. Shorty had been in dogs almost as long as School had been alive and School had seen Shorty's name in the journal umpteen times. Soon after the schoolteacher left, Biggs found matches for Ben and Smilin' Sam. Cowood moved in with Biggs and began working the dogs. Biggs sent the schoolteacher pictures of Ben and Sam working on a huge turntable with Sherwood coaching them. Many Texas and Oklahoma dog men used turntables for conditioning instead of treadmills. They also used huge, thick, and wide padded collars instead of harnesses. The schoolteacher put up the forfeits and anticipated the big day when his two prized dogs could compete in Oklahoma, under the direction and with the conditioning of the great Oklahoma Shorty. Boy, was he in for a surprise. One day, about 2 weeks before the matches were to take place, Biggs called and said, "Ben and Sam disappeared." The schoolteacher was in shock. He not only lost 2 of the best dogs in the country, he had to pay both forfeits. The schoolteacher searched everywhere for the stolen dogs and advertised a reward for them in the journal, to no avail. About that time, Cowood moved out of Biggs' house and supposedly Biggs did not know where he went. It was several months later that the schoolteacher found out what happened. He got a call from a fellow in Canada. It turned out, Hugh Harrow and Larry Says of Manitoba had seen a match in Canada. Oklahoma Shorty had brought a dog, that was in shape for a match, to sell a Canadian. Cowood handled the dog, which turned out to be Smilin' Sam. Sam came in 3 pounds light. The match went over 2 hours with Sam winning, but dying after the match. The only person benefiting was, you guessed it, the infamous little scallywag punk from Oklahoma, Tommy Cowood. He also took Ben and matched him catch weight, which means no weight limit. He put Ben on a much bigger dog and got him whipped. The schoolteacher later found Ben in the backyard of an acquaintance of Biggs in Sayre, Oklahoma. Turns out Cowood and Biggs were in cahoots to scam money out of the schoolteacher. Needless to say, that was the end of that friendship. The schoolteacher ended up going after Cowood and ran into Tommy Jr., Cowood's son in Hobart. Tommy Jr. pulled a sawed-off shotgun on the teacher, but the teacher searched his place anyway. Oklahoma Shorty never worked and bounced around from place to place, so the schoolteacher never found him. Biggs turned out to be a child molester and moved back to someplace in Arkansas. The schoolteacher got Ben back and made him a champion by beating Matluke of Oklahoma at Darrell Hawk's place in Arkansas. Hawk and Matluke partnered up with the son of the well-known Matluke SCH truck and lost in about an hour to the old over-the-hill Ben dog. Matluke and Hawk lost both matches that day to the schoolteacher. They had agreed to pay for the schoolteacher's motel and traveling expenses for driving to their backyard. They reneged and acted like babies when they lost all their money. They had a great little Leitner-bred dog named Mule that lost to Rick's Red Eagle dog that later became known as Baby Huey's Grand Champion Red Eagle. It was a heck of a battle, going 2.5 hours in the summer with non-stop action. Mule was a 2-time winner and definitely the best dog Red Eagle beat on his way to his grand championship. Mule never quit or made a bad move the entire match. A bad move is a sign of not wanting to continue, like standing without trying to continue or turning away from combat. Old champion Ben ended up going to the Netherlands by way of Brussels, Belgium. He definitely boosted the quality of European combat dogs. Many American dog men took advantage of foreigners wanting dogs from the US. But not the schoolteacher, he let them have some good ones, Champion Ben being one of them. Red Eagle was a real good little Tonka-bred dog, but wasn't the caliber of Smilin' Sam. I hope you enjoy this article and have liked the video. As I said, my only reward for providing this level of content is your likes and subscriptions to the Tony Montana channel.